This pair of women's pants needs to be taken in at the sides, pretty much from the waistband down through the knee area. I might have opted to take this pair of pants in through the waist at the back seam, but doing so would have brought the two pockets too close together and would have looked funny. And in that event of taking it in through the back seam, I would have also needed to make a seam through this thick waistband, which I can do and often do. But this time around we're going to take the excess out through the side seams, which does already have a side seam through the waistband, and we'll just go from here. The client and I figured out how much needed to come out at her fitting. She had the pair of pants on, and I just went along the side of her hips and pinned out the excess. Now I'm about to measure all of the different pins and try to find my average. It looks so far like 3/4 of an inch on one side, therefore equaling 1.5 inches total, is what needs to come off each side. I'll check this other side. Because the art of pinning on the body is imperfect, I'm taking the average of what I'm finding. And it indeed would be 3/4 of an inch until we start to get down here towards the knee. So when all is measured, 3/4 inches times 4 does equal 3 inches. That's how much we'll be taking off this pair of pants today. Also, I'm going to measure from waist to knee, and that's 18 inches. I'll note the 18 inches and the 3 inches off the waist and take the pins out now, and we'll proceed with turning this pair of pants inside out and marking our area to stitch. Now that this pair of pants is inside out, I want to release the waistband from the pants. So I'll take my ripper, starting back a goodly amount, and start ripping. Through to about that much on the other side. Here we go from the front, releasing, and we may find we have to rip off even a little more as we go along, because you have to have enough room to turn the waistband inside out and sew it up and replace it back on the pants. Waistband now released, back to inside out again. At this point we're not dealing with the waistband, we are dealing with the side seam from the waist area down that 18-inch mark. Somewhere at the knee that ends up 18 inches down. Now we'll mark off that 3/4 inches along the side of the side seam, doing so from the original seam and not out here, but from the original seam. 3/4 inch. Now we sort of get to the curve. Start drawing confidently our new stitching seam line. Take a good look at this chalked line. Here's the waist. We've gone the 3/4 inches in for quite a ways, and then less and less, tapering to 0, or the original seam line, 18 inches down. Having pinned our new seam line, let's sew. Right on down the line. Getting close to that 18-inch mark, where we come out to the original seam line. There we are. This is when we decide how we're going to finish this seam. It's a fairly wide seam, so you won't have to rip out the old seam. You need to decide how to trim the seam, whether it's going to be with pinking shears, using your home sewing machine's zigzag finishing effect, or use a serger that you may own. I have a serger. I'm going to serge the excess off. Remember the waistband? We're going to deal with that now. We've ripped the waistband away from the pants. Now we need to rip out the top area about the same amount as you did down at the top. Get that all released because we have to take that in now, the 3/4 inches each side, equaling actually 1.5 inches total. So rip back that amount and more, because again, you have to have room to turn this inside out to take in that seam. The other side does not have a seam or an original seam. I'll have to make one. How I will make a seam in that facing that doesn't have already an existing seam is I'll go back to the front, mark it right down the seam line with a couple of pins, turn it over. See where those pins are? All I have to do now is draw a line. I'm used to doing that, so it's easy for me. You probably want to place it down flat if you have less experience. Take a ruler, line it up with those pins, draw your line. Now cut that line. All set to take in. You'll be taking in this seam on the machine, and then you'll take in your 3/4 inches on each side on the facing. I have just sewn in 3/4 inch the waistband new seam line. Now I want to contend with that facing that we cut. This is where it gets a little tricky, and when you're glad you have ripped back quite a ways so that you can work in this small space. See how I'm having a little bit of a challenge getting this pinned. There, I wrestled it down. Ready to sew. Follow the 3/4 inch guideline on your sewing machine. A little tricky. There it is. Turn it all right side out. It matches there at the top, and it matches up to the pants. We'll trim some seams on the waistband and then go ahead and attach the waistband to the pants. I'm going to sew the top of the waistband first. It's a tight spot, admittedly, but I've matched the two seams together here. Here's the rest of the gap extending out either side a good 1.5 inches. Now we'll sew it. It's some pretty tight quarters here. Just do the best you can. It's a narrow seam. You're going from one existing narrow seam to the other end. And this is when your manual dexterity, as best as you can do, comes into play. It's tricky. but so worth it. It worked out nicely. It's time to attach the waistband to the pants, leaving the facing free. Again, a tight spot, I've pinned it inside out, and go for it. That is one tight spot. We're almost there. And again, looks good. Lastly, we need to get this sewn down. So from the front waistband, we'll pin through all thicknesses. Being careful to get that seam, waistband seam, contained. See? Back as far as where you ripped out. This won't be as tight of a spot to sew. But now you're going to be sewing from here to here, from the front. It's called stitching in the ditch. You're stitching in the ditch of the seam. Stitch in the ditch then. The waistband meets the pants is the ditch. Making sure everything's all flat. Stitching in the ditch. And here I've just caught up with the original stitching. Voila! Facing stitched down. The idea is for the stitching in the ditch to be virtually invisible. So go slowly and carefully.